drive down to the courthouse, you can just tune in online.
You can join my office.
Or you can hang out with Cindy. And you can hear the whole thing through the thin walls. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, Sydney.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
So, trying to explain planning and zoning, probably like every other division or department in the county, is impossible to do in 15-20 minutes. So I'm going to talk fast, but hopefully give you a good overview of what we do every day. So I thought I'd start with what is planning and zoning. Planning and zoning are two separate functions that work together to help us grow quality communities, quality counties. On the planning side is kind of the side that I feel like a lot of people don't really see as much as they do the zoning side of things. But on the planning side of things, it is really about outreach and bringing planners with together with citizens and politicians and community organizations, anybody out there that can work together to basically establish a common view or vision for either a community or a project. The biggest or the most common type of plan that I think is discussed in the planning world is a comprehensive plan. Many municipalities and counties have these. They adopt comprehensive plans, and that really is the guiding document to growth for that jurisdiction. There are also land use plans, transportation plans, all sorts of plans that can be adopted and hopefully implemented. Not always the case, but that's always the end goal, is to implement the plan. The zoning side of things is kind of, I think, what more people are used to hearing about. Greene County has zoning. Most of our surrounding counties do not. And then I know, like to the north in Polk County, certain municipalities have zoning, but if you're in unincorporated area, it's kind of a no man's land. So I'll talk about it more, but we get a lot of people who are very confused all of the time why there are rules if they don't live within a city limit. But zoning is the mechanism used to regulate how property can be used and developed. Basically, there are a set of zones, and then there are regulations specific to each zone. Things that are regulated per zone would be permitted uses, so what you can and cannot do there. The size of the tract that can be allowed within that zone, setbacks, so how far can your structure be located from a property line. And then on the commercial side of things, we require things like open space. So in certain districts, you can't just pave your entire parcel. And then things like parking spaces. So depending on what type of business you're trying to construct and operate, then that determines the number of parking spaces you have to provide. So there's really a big range of things that are listed in each zoning district as far as regulations go. So planning and zoning in Greene County, it's been around for a while, whether people want to believe it or not. We hear that, when did this happen? Well, actually, it's been happening for a very long time. In 1964, zoning was approved for the first time by a vote of the people, 2-1. And then in 1969, the Mobile Home Association filed a lawsuit against county zoning, basically saying that the ballot language wasn't right and that the establishment of zoning in Greene County was not legal. And so in 1971, a judge ruled that the language on that 1964 ballot was actually not accurate. And so they said a new election must be held within 120 days so that people can re-vote whether they want this to be something in Greene County or not. On November 30th, 1971, everybody came out. I say everybody, I believe it was 9,100 people came out and voted, but zoning did prevail. They voted to go ahead and keep zoning in Greene County. And so as of 71, everything was okay. Zoning got to stay. January 1975, Greene County became a first-class county. And then in 78, there was a set of revised zoning regulations adopted. On our book, this is our zoning reg book. That's the date that we have down here. So that's kind of what we recognize as our zoning code. Obviously, there's been some amendments since then, but that's the date that we use. And then in 1998, the state allowed for the adoption of subdivision regulations, which is kind of a separate set of regs that has to do with the subdividing of land. And then in 1999, August 2nd, Greene County adopted their own version of subdivision regulations. So a little bit of a history, but it has been here for a while. And I feel like it's here to stay, and we're just going to keep getting better at it and moving forward. So what do we actually do upstairs? We do a lot of trying to explain things to people, calm people down. There are a lot of positives. We help people do a lot of cool things. But we do face a lot of citizens or property owners that just don't understand what's in this book, and they don't understand why they have to listen. It's their property, so why do you get to tell me what I get to build, where I get to put it, that I can't do this? And so we do a lot of listening and head shaking and practicing grace, but also being like, I'm sorry, this is kind of how it goes. So our job upstairs is to enforce the county's adopted regulations by helping citizens and property owners accomplish their development goals. So this can be small-scale projects or large-scale projects. We help people if they want to build a shop in their backyard, they live in a subdivision, to large commercial developments, millions of dollars in construction, things like that. So it really is a large scale. But really, I feel like all of it really starts with zoning. That's probably the first thing, or one of the first things that we are going to ask a property owner or a citizen. Do you know what your property is zoned? And if you don't, then we'll figure it out, because that zoning classification is going to give us the groundwork for the regulations that they are going to have to follow throughout their project. So zoning in Greene County, we have a lot of different zoning districts. They're all listed there, and then that map shows, that's a zoning map. So each different color block represents a different zoning classification. We do have a lot of ag in Greene County. We have 2 different agricultural zones. The difference is being the tract size that's allowed, basically. And then we have residential, commercial, manufacturing, and then a plot assignment district, which is our specialized zoning. So if somebody comes in and they have a project that really doesn't fit nice and neat into one of those listed zoning districts, then they can apply for what's called a plot assignment district and then tailor their regulations within the confines of our book, but tailor their regulations specifically to their project and to their property. And then just kind of an example. So for each district, like I said, we've got this handy dandy book of regulations. We all carry it around with us. I mean, every day, all day, because chances are we're going to need to reference something. And I will say I read this every day, all day, and I still feel like I'll read something and be like, have I read that before? I don't know if that's a good thing to admit, but there's a lot of information in here that that we are responsible to make sure that we let the property owner know. So this is kind of what it looks like. This is just a snippet from our A1 district. So you can see, maybe kind of small, but every district starts out with the intent of what the district is for, and then principal permitted uses. So in A1, which is just our general agriculture district, obviously agriculture is the first thing listed for the principal permitted uses. And then single family detached dwelling, private non-commercial recreational areas, private utilities, essential services, private stables, and then that's it. So 5 things that are principal permitted uses. There is a whole list of accessory uses. So as long as you have one of those 5 on the property, then you can also do anything out of section 2, which would be your accessory use. And then on the right-hand side, that kind of shows setbacks and property size requirements. So each district also has that. In an A1 district, the minimum tract size is 5 acres. And then within that 5 acres, depending on what you're building, there are going to be requirements for how far your structures can be from property lines. So in ag, if you're building a single family dwelling, you have to have 50 feet from your front property line, 50 feet from the rear, and then 25 on each side. Those get smaller as you get into our residential districts, but in A1, those are your setbacks. And then probably the most common thing that people know about zoning or rezones is that it goes through a public hearing process. So you'll see signs probably all over Springfield, but then out in the county that says notice of a public hearing. So anytime a property owner or citizen wants to change the zoning of their property, so they own 20 acres and everything around them is kind of developing in a commercial way, so they want to get a little taste of that, they want to rezone to commercial, they can. Everybody has the right to apply to do that. And so the process for that is they would come to our office and submit an application. There are a lot of steps in between, but these are the major ones. Once they've submitted, then we send out a notice of the application to rezone to properties within 500 feet. So that's how the neighbors get involved. They get a notice in the mail that says a surrounding property has applied to the county to change their zoning classification. That's usually when the phone calls start, is when they get those letters in the mail. We also post a physical notice on the property in 2 different places so that people driving by see their big red signs and have all of the meeting information and also the request, but also our phone number so that they can call and get more information about the application. But staff doesn't get to make those decisions. We don't decide whether or not a property is rezoned or not. We are getting everything ready to be able to present it to the Greene County Planning Board. And the Greene County Planning Board is made up of 8 members that are appointed by the county commission. A commissioner sits on the board, they rotate monthly, and then we have the highway administrator that also serves on that board. So total it's 8, 6 appointed, 2 county employees basically. And so that's where the first public hearing happens. Those are on the 3rd Tuesday of every month if you're so inclined to come. They're usually entertaining. Also kind of boring. They can drag for sometimes hours and hours. But tonight's going to be short, I hope. So tonight would be a good one if you just feel very interested. But basically, they come and they present their case to the planning board. Staff briefs them the week before, so the planning board has an idea of what the project is, what the property looks like. Everything that we look at, we compare to our land use plan. And so if an application comes through that's just really not consistent with the future land use plan that the county has adopted, chances are it's going to be a hard sell to get a recommendation for approval from the planning board. But sometimes it does happen if there are unique circumstances that apply to the property. There are ways to kind of still make that recommendation for approval if it doesn't meet the land use plan. But essentially the first public hearing is with the Greene County Planning Board. And that's where most of the neighbors come out and give their testimony, whether it be in opposition or in favor of the zoning change. And then the planning board discusses, and then they make a recommendation. They vote to recommend either approval or denial to the county commission. Our commissioners have the final say in these zoning changes. And so once the following week, or sometimes the 2 weeks after, but at the county commission hearing, they hear these cases as well. Usually the applicants come to those. Sometimes we have folks that come and want to testify again, but they've got a recommendation on the table. And so the commission takes that into consideration, and then they either vote yes or no to approve the zoning change. So that's the process in a nutshell. Like I said, there's a lot of moving parts in between each hearing or even just getting ready for the hearing. But that is the process that, you hear about and see in the news. And luckily, I feel like the county, we've been pretty quiet. There hasn't been any crazy controversial cases lately. I say that and now we're going to get one. But so far, we've been pretty lucky. And then I would say the other thing that we do most of our days is help people with their actual property and how they can subdivide. So people assume that they can just get a deed, sell a little chunk off their property to their family member or their neighbor. But based on that state regulation, we have the ability to regulate any tract under 10 acres, 10 acres or smaller. And so a lot of people don't realize that when they're buying out in the county, they buy a 40-acre parcel and they want to give, 5 acres to their son to build a house, and they get a deed made, get that recorded, and then they think they're done. Well, the issue is then they come in for a building permit and we look, and as far as we know, that property is still 40 acres. And so there's a process to go through to legally subdivide parcels under 10 in Greene County, and that's called an administrative subdivision. It requires an application and a survey that shows what the new tracts will look like and where all the property lines will be located. In this process, it starts in our office, but it really is a collective effort between planning and zoning, environmental, the highway department, because we're looking for things like access, if there are sinkholes or floodplain on the property. If a property is riddled with sinkholes and we say, sure, you can go ahead and split it into 2, but then one tract you can't build anywhere because of the sinkholes, it's just not a good practice. So when somebody submits a survey, it goes through several steps of review, and back and forth between the divisions and then back and forth between the surveyor before it's actually approved. And then once it is approved, then that is when the property owner can then use those legal descriptions to record deeds and actually sell their property. So this is also a surprise to a lot of people. They come in and either pull a permit or just have questions about their property, or they've purchased a piece of property and didn't realize that it wasn't subdivided legally. And those are really hard conversations to have with people when they're coming in to pull a permit to build their dream home. And you're like, okay, but wait, somebody somewhere skipped some steps, and thank you for coming to actually get a permit. But first we have to go through the steps to make your property legal. So just, if you're in a county with zoning, make sure your property has been divided legally. And then another part of our division, which Jennifer presented several months ago, I think, on code enforcement, but code enforcement falls within the planning and zoning division. And so anytime we experience or get a complaint about a piece of property that has a violation, so any violation from this book, whether it be a use violation or trash and dumping, if they've got an environmental violation, those all come through Jen and Jake at the code enforcement office. So the picture of the house there, sometimes you can drive past a property and you'd have no idea that there's a current violation on that property. If I was driving by, I would notice that there's some random hoses in the front, but other than that, it just looks like a house. This one actually is an active case. They are operating a business out of this property. They've got a slew of violations, but they don't have a conditional use permit. So the use, they've got their zoning, but the use that they are utilizing this property for does not fit within their zoning classification. They should have taken an extra step to get the needed permit to be able to do what they are doing there. They've been made aware several times, but still have not come into compliance. So code enforcement can look like a lot of different things. The other two are trash and dumping. The one in the bottom corner also is a use violation. You can see that there are recreational vehicles or campers there. That's a zoning violation. Based on our regs, you can't live in a travel trailer, which also a lot of people don't realize in Greene County, you can't do that. And so code enforcement is a big part of what we do, but it can look like a lot of different things. And then I just wanted to touch on planning projects. So while we are helping customers and doing zoning hearings and all of the things on a day-to-day, there's also behind the scenes things that we work on. We currently are working with the Southwest Missouri Council of Governments to complete a corridor study. We're looking at the future land use for the East Highway 60 corridor. So basically between Springfield and Rogersville. We get a lot of we've gotten a lot of zoning applications in the last couple of years for that corridor. And so to try and help assist the planning board and the commission in making some of those decisions, we felt like it would be beneficial to study that area, get input from the citizens that live there, the businesses around there. What do they feel like the growth in this area is going to look like? And so working on that, hopefully that will be adopted later this year. But that will really be a good tool for the planning board and the commission when we get those applications for zoning changes for parcels on that corridor. And then we also are working on amendments to the subdivision regulations. Our zoning code could use a little bit of an update. And so we've been actively marking things in there and trying to figure out how we can amend those to basically kind of just continue to foster growth, but in a responsible way. There are a lot of things in here that don't necessarily apply anymore. It's, you know, it's a 20-year-old term that maybe is not relevant. And so little things updating like that makes it easier for us to enforce and also for citizens to understand. And then also would love to update the county's comprehensive and future land use plan. So lots of things we are doing kind of behind the scenes that will have an impact on how we are able to operate and enforce these regulations, and then how it affects the property owners and the citizens as well. So we are located upstairs, 3rd floor. And then I just wanted to introduce the staff real quick. I'm Sydney, and then we have Dave Mannery, he's a planner, Thomas Hughes and Amber Ryan, wave. They're also planners. Micah Painter, she's our planning technician. And then Jennifer and Jake, they are our code enforcement specialists. So I feel like we've got the best team ever. Everybody works very hard and really cares about what we do here, and how we are able to help citizens accomplish kind of what they want to do with their properties. And then we worked last year to establish, just for our division, kind of some core values and a mission statement that we want to use and just remember in our day-to-day activities. Sometimes it gets pretty gloomy. You know, if you've been, I know you can all sympathize, but if you've been yelled at for an hour and a half straight, or just really had to deliver bad news all day, it can wear on you. And but we really want to work on our core values and our mission statement. So compassion, exceptional customer service, preservation and the growth of our community, being transparent, and being good stewards. Those are really our core values for Planning and Zoning Division. And then our mission is that we are committed to protecting the welfare of our citizens through the responsible development of our county. I think that's all I've got. Are there any questions? Yeah.
What's your criteria for serving on the planning board, and is it divided up into districts?
Yeah, so I believe, you have to be a citizen of Greene County, but then I believe it's just an appointment. Is that correct?
They have to live in the unincorporated
Part of Greene County, yeah. So not within a city limit. Yeah. And then the commissioners get to appoint them.
And it's a 3-year term.
Anything else? Okay. Oh, yeah.
So in the news, we've been seeing a lot of different things with the planning and zoning of Springfield.
Mhm.
How does our rules and regulations that we have to follow differ from what city has to do?
Yeah, so I mean, I think they have more steps for a property owner if they want to rezone or do something like that. And I think that's the biggest difference. So they have to hold neighborhood meetings, and they do their own postings and things like that. And I think that is really the step that stirs up the most controversy in those cases. If you have a developer going out and talking to the neighborhood, it can go either great or it can go really poorly. And the ones that go poorly are usually the ones that we hear about on the news. But for the most part, most processes are pretty much, I mean, they're very, very similar. It's still, we're bound by statutes that regulate how we have to provide notice and go through the public hearing process. So they're very similar. But I believe Springfield's is a little more, they put a little bit more responsibility on the property owner to get through that process. Okay, well, thank you guys. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So if they don't ever, what do they illegal?
shut it down at some point?
Eventually, yes, that if we just cannot get them to come in and file for their conditional use permit, go through that process to get it approved, then we'll go through essentially the court process where we will go through that process and they'll be ordered to cease operation there. Obviously, that's not what we ever want to do. We'll work with them as long as it takes to bring them into compliance so they can utilize their property how they want to. But there are measures in place for us to be able to say, we've given you enough time. You still haven't come into compliance, so now you just can't do this at all. And those ones are hard. It's hard to make somebody stop doing something, but it happens. Yeah.
So what are some of the biggest hurdles that you run into of getting people to come into compliance? Is it just because they're stubborn and don't want to, or what are some of the biggest things that are the hurdles?
I think that's probably the biggest one. They just don't feel like they should have to. It's their property. They should be able to use it how they want. Most of the processes cost money. So if you've got acres full of trash, it's going to cost money to remove it all. Or like the house, they require a conditional use permit. So that's public hearings they'll have to attend and also a fee. So I think the financial aspect is a big one. When Jen and Jake can jump in if I'm saying anything out of turn, but when they're out there, I think cost comes up a lot. If they've got trailers or cars or campers that are out there that have been there for a couple years and they're pretty much staying where they're going to stay, it's a pretty big financial burden to take those away or take those off the property. So yeah, and I think just knowledge and education, it's a surprise to a lot of people and they really feel like they didn't know and we're not doing anything that we shouldn't be able to do. So coming to terms with, well, you actually live in a county that does have rules and regulations that you have to abide by. I think that's a hurdle too. Once we can get past that and they realize that we're willing to work with them and, we're not saying you have 30 days in your property. I mean, these take months to clean up and to bring into compliance. So I think once we can overcome that hurdle and they realize that, we're going to try to work with them, then it goes a little smoother. But some of them just don't. They don't care and they don't want to come into compliance. And those are the tough ones.
They end up in Webster County.
Yeah. Yeah. They go somewhere without planning and zoning. Yeah.
Yeah, we did have one that actually left, as he said.
Yeah.
But they also left West Virginia because West Virginia was not gun friendly. Now
Right.
figure that one.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a hard one. That was a hard one. Yeah.
Got to witness Bob pound the gavel. He really got upset. The guy was blowing our staff liars. He was. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a fun one. We kept some souvenirs from that case. Okay. Well, if you're around, we'd love to see you upstairs. If you have any questions or questions about your own properties or somebody else's, we're happy to help.